So the video I read this week was Household Food Insecurity and Childhood Overweight in Jamaica and Quebec, a gender-based analysis. It was published in the BMC Public Health Journal in 2011. The article's topic was about the prevalence of obesity in overweight children in developed and developing countries and the factors that play into this, especially food insecurity and gender. The research was done in the two countries in the title, Jamaica, which is a developing country, and the province of Quebec, which is a developed country. In the intro, the authors start out by pointing out that childhood obesity and overweight has become a crisis in today's health world. They point out that the negative impacts of this, such as the psychosocial side of it and the physiological side of it. And then they also point out another crisis in today's health world, that's food insecurity. And so their aim in this research article is to discover if there's a relationship between these two things, and also to evaluate the differences in gender in childhood obesity and the differences in developed and developing countries. So to do this, they started out by taking samples in each country of 10 to 11-year-old children that were proportionate to the population of children. So in Quebec, they took 2,103, and in Jamaica, they took 1,674. They started out by taking anthropometric measurements of each participant. They did their BMI, and they used Cole's age and sex-specific criteria to determine whether or not the child was overweight or obese. And then within these obese groups, they took and they tested factors that could possibly relate to obesity, like family type, single-parent family, blended family. They did family socioeconomic status, food insecurity, dietary analysis, where they would give the kids questionnaires and ask them how many times they ate a week. They ate fruits and vegetables, how many times they consumed pastries, which counted as like cookies, cake, things like that. They did physical activity level, and I think that's it. And in the results, it came back that in Quebec, there was 26% of children that were overweight or obese, and 9% of the children were food insecure. In Jamaica, the results were kind of flip-flopped. There was 11% obesity rate and a 26% rate of food insecurity. Also in Quebec, higher rates of obesity were associated with low socioeconomic status of the family and food insecurity in the family. But in Jamaica, higher rates of obesity were associated with higher socioeconomic status and food security. Results in terms of the sex-based analysis was that in Quebec, obesity and overweight in girls was found to be more associated with basically all of the factors, really. SES, family type, physical activity, dietary analysis, food insecurity. But then in boys, there was no significant associations between any of those factors and being obese or overweight. In Jamaica, the only factor that was significant with obesity and overweight in girls was physical activity level. And then in boys, the only factor that associated or was significant was high SES status in the family. So in the discussion, they start out by stating that the findings in the Quebec study correlated with findings from Canada as a whole, as well as findings from other developed countries like the United States. And then in Jamaica, the findings from the study, the percentage of overweight, obese children was actually a little bit lower than other studies found in Jamaica. And then, like I said before, an interesting part of the results was that in Quebec, obesity and overweightness was associated in children in food insecure families and families of lower socioeconomic status, but oppositely, in Jamaica, children who were obese or overweight were more associated with families of high socioeconomic status, meaning they had more money, or families that were food secure. So it was suggested that this could be partly because in developed countries like Quebec in the United States, they have social programs like food stamps, WIC, etc. to help families who are in low-income families or who are food insecure. The bad thing about this is that a lot of times in these cases, non-nutritive foods like whole grains, fruits, vegetables, things that are healthier for you are substituted with cheaper, not as healthy foods, which leads to obesity in the children. Oppositely, in developing countries like Jamaica, they don't have a lot of government assistance programs that help families that are food insecure or don't have enough money to buy food, so therefore they just eat less and they're usually underweight. When discussing the gender differences, it was interesting to me that higher rates of obesity in Quebec was shown in girls than boys. And when they looked into this, they found that in the obese girls versus boys, more obese girls came from single-parent families and families of low economic status. So these varying environments between girls and boys that are obese could very well play a role. In Jamaica, when discussing that boys had higher obesity rates when they were in high socioeconomic status, this actually compared to studies from other developing countries where high socioeconomic status was associated with obesity, not only in just children, but also men and women as well. Strength of the study included that the samples were representative of the population size, and also that there was an 85% response rate in the samples. And also another strength was that the anthropometric measurements taken, like BMI, at the very first of the study are objective, so they're probably very accurate. The limits to the study was that none of the associations they found in the study can be given causality because the study was cross-sectional. Another limitation was that physical activity in Quebec was measured through the parents and their perception of their child's physical activity, not necessarily from the child, so it was more of a subjective measurement. And then in Jamaica, classification of family socioeconomic status wasn't based on parent income or education, so that kind of puts a little hitch in that. And then another and final issue was that they couldn't measure the effects of levels of food insecurity on obesity because there was issues when measuring food insecurity. In conclusion, the study does confirm that there is a relationship between food insecurity or security and obesity and overweight in children, whether the association be positive or negative. It also confirms that there is indeed gender differences in obesity rates in children. The confirmation stand as ground that, when you're looking into causes of obesity in children, that we should be looking beyond just biological aspects and individual behaviors of the children and more into environmental factors and behavioral factors as a whole. Why this study was important to me is because I was actually really overweight as a child. I weighed about 200 pounds when I started middle school, and then my last year in middle school I lost about 70 pounds, and so I've been able to maintain that, and I live a much healthier life now. But it's important to me because I know how lonely and horrible and miserable it feels to be that overweight kid in school while all your other friends are doing stuff you can't do because you're overweight. And then why it should be important to my classmates and as well as the rest of the world is that we want to figure out why so many kids are obese and the cause of it and the real root cause of it, because we want a healthy and happy future for our kids and everyone's kids all over the world. It's just important for the future state of health for the entire world.